The following is a special video presentation of the Hennepin County Library.
Hi, welcome to a discussion with Fred Chico Lager. I'm Eileen Cavanaugh from the Hennepin County Library Program Office, and my guest today is the author of Ben & Jerry's The Inside Scoop. Welcome, Chico.
Thank you.
Good to have you here.
It's a pleasure to be here.
This book is such a fun read. When I first picked it up, I thought, who wants to read a business book, especially during the summer of '94 as we are here? And then I just read a chapter, as I often do, to decide whether I like a book well enough to continue. And it was great, the story of two real guys who decided to make their living selling ice cream, basically. And I wondered why you, who have been CEO with Ben & Jerry's for about 8 years or so, decided to take 2 years of your life and write the story.
Well, it's interesting. I actually decided that I was going to write a book about the company back in around 1984. The business at that point was about $4 million in sales, but it had already experienced some really exceptional growth. Ben & Jerry are very captivating, entertaining individuals, great personalities, and our business just seemed to lend itself to great storytelling. So it seemed like the story of how these two guys started with no business experience and $12,000 in cash in an abandoned gas station in downtown Burlington, Vermont, and we're creating a really successful and very innovative and very entertaining business would make a really good read. So I started actually making notes to myself and writing down quotes all the way back in 1984.
And they learned how to make ice cream by a $5 correspondence course?
It's true. Penn State University, I think it actually costs more than that now, but they actually still do offer the course. But it was a $5 correspondence course. They split it. They each threw in $2.50, and they were open book tests, and they got A's on all of them.
Amazing.
It is.
Two things really struck me about this book. Well, more than two, but two things I thought were really important, and how honest you were about the many mistakes that were made in the course of the business, even after it became a profitable business, and the amazingly long hours that people spent. How were people motivated to, Ben says he worked 80 to 100 hours a week.
It's true. Ben in the early days used to joke that the business was running them, they weren't running the business. It's a commitment that is pretty typical actually for entrepreneurs who are running small businesses. It's that type of commitment that's really required to succeed. And when you're struggling to make your business a success, when you're struggling to survive, to pay your bills and to pay yourself a salary, you do whatever it takes. And we were very successful because we were able to really convey that whatever it takes attitude, not just at the top of our organization, but it really filtered down, and we really had that throughout the organization. With even the people who were making the ice cream would put in phenomenal hours for us when we needed them in order to fill the orders.
Well, someplace it seems to me it said that the philosophy was give 110%. That's fine, but did the company give 110% back to the employees?
Well, we tried. You know, in the early days, you know, the company was. I would say it tried to be a very good employer, and I think it treated the employees really well. Although financially, the rewards were not that great because there really wasn't that much money. But we made a commitment to our employees around the phrase linked prosperity. And the commitment was that as the business grew and became more successful, that we would share that success not just with a few people at the top of the organization, but throughout the organization. So we instituted a profit-sharing plan that split up 5% of our pre-tax profits amongst all the employees, and it was based on how long people had worked at the company. It wasn't based on salary or rank or stature within the organization. The company was essentially perkless. Everybody got the same benefits, including the infamous 3 free pints a day. So there were stock given to the employees, 10% across of people's salary across the board. So through things like this, we conveyed a caring attitude towards our employees, and they were willing to put in the hours and put in the efforts, feeling that it was going to pay off down the road.
Another unique aspect of Ben & Jerry's was the fact that they had a ratio of initially 5 to 1. The top, if I'm correct, the top paying person in the company only received 5 times as much as the entry-level person.
It's true. That was
it's quite amazing.
It is amazing. It's since gone up to 7 to 1, and even today in 1994, it's subject to continued debate amongst the board of directors as to whether or not it's a good policy. The concept behind it is a really good one. The idea is that people throughout the organization contribute to the company's success, and it's not just a few people at the top who make a business successful, but the people on the line who are actually making the ice cream also contribute greatly to how successful the business is. So from a conceptual standpoint, it makes a lot of sense. Where it hits the rubber and where you start to run into some problems is that it creates somewhat of a limit in terms of what you can pay at the top, and we've run into some problems recruiting some senior level managers as a result, because obviously Ben & Jerry's doesn't operate in a vacuum, and when we go to recruit senior managers, we're competing with other businesses that don't operate under that same limitation. And we found in a lot of our recruiting efforts that we've gone out and had to literally try to convince people to come to work for Ben & Jerry's and take a pay cut, which is a very difficult thing to do. I mean, Ben & Jerry's is a fun place to work, but there aren't too many people who want to take a 30 or 40% pay cut in order to have the honor of working there.
Have the ice cream.
That's right. I mean, the ice cream's good, but I don't think it's quite that good.
Well, you said that when people had an objection when they interviewed, that they were told, well, there is no ceiling for the executive positions. You just have to see to it that you're paying the entry-level people a fifth of what you're getting.
It's true, and we did regularly raise our entry-level wages. We were raising them at least annually, sometimes twice a year. And our entry-level wage in '94 now in our factory is $8 an hour, which is actually fairly good. But the reality is that when you raise the bottom, everything goes up, and in order to give a reasonable raise to your senior level managers, you have to add about $500,000 to your payroll, and you begin to wonder whether you can actually afford that. So, I mean, it creates a nice tension to a certain extent, but as the business grew beyond $100 million in sales, that's when we made the adjustment to 7 to 1, and now as the company gets even bigger than that, we're looking at it again.
So you've kind of answered my next question, which is how does a company remain socially responsible, as Ben & Jerry's has been committed to doing, and still show some profitability?
Well, we do it in a number of ways. Traditionally, social responsibility has meant giving a percentage of your profits to nonprofit organizations, and there's some companies in Minnesota that have been very progressive and have been leaders in that field. Ben & Jerry's does give 7.5% of our pre-tax profits to a foundation that then distributes the money to nonprofit organizations nationally, both in Vermont and across the country. But what we found is that there's a lot more than a business can do than just give away a percentage of its profits. And what we try and do is factor in a way of giving back to the community into day-to-day business decisions whenever possible. And I can give you an example of how we do that. One example would be through ingredient purchases. Obviously, we're making ice cream and we're buying a lot of ingredients for that product. One of the ingredients in our chocolate fudge brownie ice cream are the brownies. Now, we could have gone to a traditional baker and purchased the brownies from them, but instead we went to a bakery called the Grayston Bakery, which is in Yonkers, New York. And the interesting thing about Grayston is that they hire the homeless, and then they use the profits from the bakery to provide transitional housing for their employees, which is all designed to try and break the cycle of homelessness and try and get people off to a good start, a new start to their lives. And by Ben & Jerry's purchasing our brownies through Grayston, we're able to give them a contract that was worth about $1 million add about 15 employees, an entire new production line. And that's a way through just a normal daily business decision that we were able to do something very valuable for a community.
So it's kind of like a pebble in the pond. It goes beyond your own company and beyond your own community, actually, too.
Absolutely. I mean, Ben likes to talk about the fact that business is the most powerful force in society, and that if we're going to just leave it to the politicians to solve our problems, we'll never really get there.
Ben sort of started from the very beginning. This wasn't a concept that developed. He said from the very beginning, when he had his little scoop shop, that he wanted to return something to the community, and one of the returns that he believed in too was celebration, community celebrations.
It's true. On the very first anniversary of the very first scoop shop in the original gas station, which was in May of 1979, they held Free Cone Day, which was an event in which they scooped free ice cream all day long to everybody who came into the shop. And on the posters that promoted Free Cone Day, there was a quote from each of the two founders. Jerry's quote was, "If it's not fun, why do it?" And Ben's quote was, "Business has a responsibility to give back to the community." And they, before they were even making any money, they were giving away free ice cream, they were sponsoring community celebrations, free movie festivals that they showed against the wall of a building next to the gas station. It was very much a part of their personalities, and the values that have really come to define the business today were really in evidence in the early days of the gas station.
They were 60s people. Is that part of the milieu out of which they came and out of which this idea of socially responsible business came?
Absolutely. You know, the 60s were a very transformational time, you know, when people started really questioning authority and the way things were. And one of the interesting things about Ben & Jerry's is it's not only a company that gives back, but it's also a company that's run in a way that really questions the traditional assumptions of the way in which a business is supposed to operate.
Do you think that American business would be better off if all CEOs were paid at a 7.5 to 1?
Well, you're asking the wrong person, because I was not one of the biggest fans of that policy. Not really so much for personal reasons, because I had some equity in the business. I had purchased some equity in the business, so I really felt that, you know, my compensation was actually okay. But as the person responsible for running the business, I wanted to attract and bring in really good, qualified senior level managers, people who were better than me, people who had expertise in manufacturing ice cream, who could teach us things that we didn't know. And in order to bring in that expertise, I felt that we needed to be a little more competitive in terms of the salary and the compensation that we were offering. So I really support the concept of a compressed salary ratio. I don't think 7 or 5 were the right number. I certainly don't agree that, you know, businesses should be paying the 300, 400, 1,000 times what their entry-level people are making to the senior-level people. I mean, Michael Eisner at Disney has done a phenomenal job there, and I'm a big fan of Disney. But you know, the people who run the Jungle Cruise, who give you such a great experience when you're in one of their parks, do a great job too. And I just think there needs to be a little more balance between the two.
Do you think this sort of speaks of the American business greed, or the fact that, I think you said maybe in the book someplace, that American business has lost its soul, or that business can lose its soul by having these vast needs to make more and more profit without regard to any of the other aspects of the business?
It's possible. You know, we found that it really works for us. A connection to the community, a connection to our employees, a connection to our customers has really worked for us. I think in general, all businesses, if they could rediscover that, I think that would be a really positive thing.
And it seems as if one of the lessons has been you can make a profit, at least a reasonable profit, I assume, too, and do all these other things besides.
Absolutely. I mean, we discussed early on what impact, you know, all of these programs and all of these policies would have on our company, and we knew that if we weren't going to be profitable, that nobody would take us seriously. And we were committed to being successful by the same standards by which Wall Street judges any other firm despite the fact that we were also doing these things. And I think in general that we've been able to do that.
You've talked about all this as, quote, company culture. How does company culture get communicated to the, say, the new employee who is just coming on the line?
Well, it's really important to orient and pass on your culture and your values. And at Ben & Jerry's, we did it a number of ways. There is a formal orientation program for a new employee who would be with a group of other new employees, hear some of the war stories in the early days of how the company had started, because somebody who comes into the company now when it's a $100 million company doesn't have the same perception of what the business was like in the early days, how it had struggled. We also pass on our culture through a series of company-wide or site-wide meetings, which are as much celebrations as they are opportunities to pass on information. And we also have a very good newsletter that's circulated. It's really more of a newspaper, an in-house publication, every 2 weeks. And we try and not just have it be dry news, this is what's going on, but the aspects of the culture that you want to pass on to your employees really have to be cherished and celebrated and really actively worked on if you want people to understand them and appreciate them.
Ben & Jerry's made some big news here in the Twin Cities back in 1984. Can you tell us about that?
Sure, that was when we had a bit of a dispute with the Pillsbury Company. And I drove by.
What was the slogan about the doughboy?
The slogan we used was, "What's the doughboy afraid of?" The origination of the dispute, Pillsbury had just purchased Haagen-Dazs, which was the #1 brand of super premium ice cream, and that was our largest direct competitor. And in 1984, Ben & Jerry's had just entered the Boston market. At that point in time, we had been selling in Vermont and New Hampshire and Maine, and Boston was really our first large urban market. And we went into the marketplace, and we're doing, reasonably well. We weren't setting the world on fire. We went in with a $20,000 marketing budget, and which was, really peanuts. But after we'd been there about 3 months or so, our distributors, the people who sold our ice cream to the supermarkets, started to get calls from a vice president at Haagen-Dazs. And the calls essentially went along the lines of, you're selling Haagen-Dazs and Ben & Jerry's, and you're going to have to make a choice. If you're going to keep Haagen-Dazs, you're going to have to drop Ben & Jerry's. And these were independent distributors who carried not just Haagen-Dazs and Ben & Jerry's, but 30 or 40 lines of ice cream, full-service ice cream distributors. Well, at the time, Ben & Jerry's was just a little speck in the marketplace, and Haagen-Dazs was the market leader. And given a choice, the distributors clearly would have picked Haagen-Dazs, although they very much wanted to continue to carry both brands. Well, our initial reaction was one of humor, because we couldn't believe that Ben & Jerry's was of concern to Haagen-Dazs or Pillsbury. We were very flattered that they had even noticed us, but we realized that this was a very serious challenge for us, because it affected our ability to distribute our product into the marketplace. And we knew that in a court of law, we would be at a decided disadvantage to Pillsbury. I think there's 20 plus lawyers on Pillsbury's in-house legal department, plus a lot of very well-respected law firms on retainer. So in addition to pursuing it legally, which we did do, we also launched the What's the Doughboy Afraid Of campaign. And we started that off by having Jerry come out to Minnesota, and he did a one-man picket in front of Pillsbury's world headquarters with a sign that said, "What's the doughboy afraid of?" And he was handing out flyers, kind of like the people who used to protest against the war. And
were you marketing in the Twin Cities at the time?
No. At the time, we were just in New England. We weren't out here. Admittedly, it was a promotional event. It was designed to try and get some media attention. We felt that if our consumers and if people found out about what Pillsbury and what Haagen-Dazs were trying to do, that they would react the same way that we did, which was, kind of indignant, kind of thinking that it was, we thought it was illegal, but we also felt like morally that it was a case of, this Fortune 500 company trying to squash this small entrepreneurial.
Had this obvious unfairness, the bully on the street.
Absolutely, and we intentionally positioned the slogan was intentional in that we didn't want to position it against Ben & Jerry's against Haagen-Dazs, because that was one ice cream company against another. But Ben & Jerry's against Pillsbury was these two hippies against the Fortune 500, which just had this wonderful appeal to the media. And sure enough, it started, I think, the Minneapolis Star and Tribune picked it up, and there was a thing on Minnesota Public Radio. And
because Minnesotans love to support the underdog.
They do. Jerry got a lot of support. I mean, there were one or two executives from Pillsbury who towed the company line, but most people who went by were very supportive. And it steamrolled. We got attention in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, USA Today, and eventually the media attention was giving us such name recognition, and we were getting such positive public relations benefit out of it, that I think it really brought Pillsbury to the negotiating table, and we were able to, they backed off, and we were able to negotiate an agreement out of court.
Wonderful, and get a lot of publicity in the...
Phenomenal publicity. I mean, at the time we were a $4 million company, and I wouldn't put a dollar value on the PR that we received, but it was millions and millions of dollars, far beyond what we could have afforded at the time.
Well, it's kind of interesting because Haagen-Dazs also started as a small company and was sort of marketed as that sophisticated import ice cream, when in fact it wasn't imported at all, and Haagen-Dazs means nothing. It's sort of a fake Danish name.
It's an interesting company. I mean, Haagen-Dazs was founded by the late Reuben Mattis, who really created, super premium ice creams. He lowered the amount of air, he raised the butterfat, and he really came out with the first really high-quality product. And he did a tremendous marketing job, as you say. He called it Haagen-Dazs because he thought the high-quality ice cream would appeal to people who were into higher-quality products, that the cachet of being European or foreign-sounding would be of benefit to them. And in fact, the ice cream was being made at first in the Bronx and then in New Jersey, and the words Haagen-Dazs have absolutely no meaning.
Well, I should go back to the whole idea of super premium ice cream, and maybe we should say what that is as opposed to run-of-the-mill ice cream.
Well, the main thing that differentiates super premium ice cream is the amount of air, which is called overrun. Most ice creams, they'll start out with a gallon of the basic ingredients, just the liquid ingredients, and in the process of freezing the ice cream, they will whip enough air into the ice cream so that you wind up with 2 gallons of ice cream. So you've actually doubled it, and it's very light as a result. A super premium ice cream only has about 20% air, so it's a much heavier, denser, richer, and creamier product. It also has a much higher butterfat content, so it's a lot creamier. And super premium ice creams also tend to be all natural, with all natural ingredients. Ice cream is unusual in that it's one of the few products that's not sold by weight. But an interesting thing that you can do is to go to the supermarket and pick up a pint of a super premium ice cream, pick up a pint of Ben & Jerry's, and pick up a pint of a regular ice cream, a Breyers, or even a lower quality ice cream, and just feel them in your hand, and you will feel that the Ben & Jerry's weighs almost twice as much as the regular ice cream, and that's because the regular ice cream has so much air in it.
Right. I found it was hard to get a spoon through Ben & Jerry's.
It's much
very
denser.
dense.
Well, you have to properly temper your ice cream before you eat it.
Tell us a little bit about America's love affair with ice cream. I assume Ben & Jerry knew something about this before they started the business. Well,
they did and they didn't. I mean, they were big consumers. They liked to eat. The main reason why they went into a food business was that they liked to eat. They were by their own admission, self-described nerds and a little chubby as youth. But they wanted to go into business together in 1978 and thought that a food business would be a good idea. Their first choice was actually a bagel business, but the ovens for making bagels were too expensive, so they settled on ice cream. But at the time, their aspirations were only to have this small homemade ice cream parlor. They didn't have any aspirations for this national business that it became, so they weren't really thinking in terms of, well, ice cream will be a product that will enable us to grow our business. It was this will be a fun product. We can have fun with our customers. We'll enjoy making it, and it was that type of attitude that they brought to their business.
Is it true that Ben developed the stronger flavors because he had sinus trouble and he couldn't taste the the milder flavors?
It's true. Jerry was the chief ice cream maker. Ben was the chief taster. And Ben has some sort of sinus condition that dates back to his youth. It's unexplained. And Jerry would make batches of ice cream and bring them to Ben, and Ben would taste them, and he'd say, "Boy, it tastes great, but I can't tell what flavor it is." So Jerry would go back and increase the amount of flavoring in it. And in addition to that, the signature of the company has become the large chunks of cookies and candies. And one of the reasons why we did that was to give the texture variation, so that Ben would have a mouthfeel to the ice cream that he could really relate to, because he was having trouble discerning the different flavors.
Well, with only 2 minutes left, I think we ought to taste some Ben & Jerry's.
Absolutely.
And tell people that there's a new option now for Ben & Jerry's.
There is a new option. These are our smooth line, a line of ice cream that is unfettered by chunks. And it's for people who are too tired to chew, as Ben says. And I think we have 3 flavors here. The Aztec Harvest Coffee, which is a coffee flavor that the ingredients are sourced directly from a cooperative in Mexico, with a higher percentage of the funds going directly to the farmers. We have Vanilla Caramel Fudge, which is an incredible ice cream. That's one of my favorites. And we have a White Russian, which was an old flavor that we brought back. This was one that we...
Is this just plain old vanilla kind of perked up?
This is vanilla with coffee flavoring. And it's named after the drink White Russian, although it doesn't have any vodka in it, but it has a variety of coffee flavors to it. And
hard to know what to try first. What do you suggest?
Well, I'm going to go for the Vanilla Caramel Fudge.
Okay, I'll do coffee.
Okay.
You got your spoon?
I got my spoon.
Now, what do you mean by whether this seems to be tempered about right? Is that the term?
Right. Ice cream, when it's manufactured, ice cream comes out of the freezers at about 20 degrees. It's kind of like the consistency of a soft serve. And then it goes into a hardening freezer, and it's brought down in temperature to about 20 degrees below zero, which is rock hard. You would not be able to eat it. And that's how it's stored and shipped. But the proper eating temperature for ice cream is about 10 degrees. So before you eat your ice cream, you want to temper it. This ice cream has been perfectly tempered.
This looks perfect.
You see that?
But I have to try some of that White Russian before we have to go. 30 seconds.
Oh.
30 seconds for White Russian.
They're all so good.
I want you to know I did research into this, even without the coupon that's on the back of the book. I bought 2 kinds of the frozen yogurt and the wavy gravy.
Wavy gravy is the first ice cream, actually the first food, packaged in a tie-dyed container. We've made food processing history with that product, named after the announcer at Woodstock.
We're going to have to stop eating, at least stop talking. Thanks for being with us, Chico. A fun interview with you.
It's been a pleasure, Eileen.
A presentation of the Hennepin County Library.